For 1,000 years, the ancient sword had waited in silence. It rested deep within the ruins of a forgotten kingdom, buried under broken stone pillars and vines. No dust ever settled on its blade. No rust touched its shining edge. The sword glowed faintly with a silver light, as if it was alive. Legends spread across worlds. This was the sword that would choose only the worthy. Warriors, kings, and even alien conquerors had tried to lift it, but whenever their hands touched the hilt, the sword grew cold and heavy, impossible to move. One by one, they all failed, and so the weapon became known as the Sword of Silence. Generations passed, empires rose and fell, but the blade remained untouched. Children whispered stories about it, priests built shrines around it, and warlords sent their champions to claim it. All returned broken, humiliated, or dead. The sword wanted no master, and in time, many began to believe the legend was false, that the blade would never awaken again. But fate was strange, and destiny rarely followed reason. Far from the ruins, in a distant trade outpost on the edge of alien space, a human traveler arrived. He had no name that anyone cared about, just a scar across his jaw and tired eyes that spoke of long journeys. He was not a warrior, not a king, and certainly not the kind of man anyone expected to be remembered in history. All he wanted was work, food, and enough credits to keep moving. But destiny had a different plan for him. The outpost was buzzing with news that day. A great warlord had once again failed to claim the sword, his army retreating in shame. The locals laughed, mocking the arrogance of rulers. And in the corner of the tavern, the human listened quietly. He had no interest in legends, but something in the story caught his heart. An ancient sword that no one could lift. He did not laugh with the others. He wondered, silently, why such a weapon existed at all. The next morning, curiosity pulled him to the ruins. The journey was not easy. The desert stretched endlessly, and broken statues of forgotten gods loomed over the sands. When he finally reached the shrine, he saw the sword standing upright, glowing faintly in the shadows. No guards, no priests, no challengers, only silence. He stepped closer, dust crunching under his boots. The air grew colder, and he felt as if unseen eyes were watching him. He swallowed hard, but his feet kept moving. The sword was taller than he expected, the blade wide, its surface carved with strange symbols that shifted like living flame. The hilt seemed warm, almost alive. He reached out, hesitating for only a moment, and then, with a single breath, he placed his hand on the sword. For the first time in 1,000 years, the blade sang. A low hum filled the air, the ruins trembled, and dust rained from the broken ceiling. The light from the sword grew brighter, casting long shadows against the cracked stone walls. The human staggered back, his heart racing. He had not tried to pull it, not yet. But the sword had responded. Somewhere in the deep halls of the ruins, an ancient mechanism stirred. Stone doors that had been sealed for centuries began to grind open. Whispers filled the chamber, voices of the past echoing. At last, he has come. The human froze, fear rising in his chest. He wanted to run, but his hand refused to let go of the hilt. The sword pulsed with warmth, almost like a heartbeat. It was not rejecting him. It was calling him. Outside the ruins, the winds shifted. Far away, in distant cities and alien palaces, seers and mystics felt the change. The silence of the sword had ended. The weapon had awakened. And the name that spread in hushed whispers was shocking. Not a king, not a champion, not a warlord, but a human, a species considered weak, fragile, unworthy. Yet it was a human who touched the blade, and the blade answered. He did not know it yet, but his life had ended the moment his fingers brushed the hilt. He was no longer just a traveler, no longer just a man searching for food and shelter. He was now part of the sword story, and that story would shake worlds. The Sword of Silence had chosen its first bearer in 1,000 years, and the universe would never forgive him for it. The ruins shook as the ancient sword pulsed with light. The human stood frozen, his hand trembling on the hilt, his breath caught in his chest. He had not yet lifted the blade, but the sword already moved as if it was alive. A deep hum spread through the walls, and the air grew heavy, filled with power that seemed older than stars. The ground cracked beneath him, broken tiles splitting apart to reveal glowing lines of energy hidden for centuries. The human stumbled backward, shielding his eyes from the blinding silver glow. For 1,000 years the sword had rejected kings, warlords, and alien champions. But now it responded as if it had finally found what it had been waiting for. A simple traveler, a man with no crown and no army. As the hum grew louder, massive stone statues that lined the chamber began to move. Their eyes flared with fire, their stone bodies grinding to life. Ancient guardians, built to test whoever touched the blade. Each one towered above the human, armed with weapons carved from the same glowing stone. Their voices rumbled like thunder. The silence is broken. Let the trial begin. The human's heart pounded in panic. He had no armor, no weapon, no training for this. He was only a wanderer, chasing food and shelter across alien lands. Yet here he was, standing in the middle of a forgotten temple while giants of stone closed in. He wanted to run, but the sword's hum anchored his feet. It called to him, demanding he fight. The nearest guardian raised its massive blade and swung. The human threw himself aside, the strike smashing the floor where he had stood. Dust and sparks filled the air. Instinct screamed at him to run, yet something stronger forced him to turn back toward the sword. Almost without thinking, he lunged forward, both hands grasping the hilt. The moment his fingers tightened, the blade rose as if it weighed nothing. The sword sang, a sharp, piercing cry that echoed across the chamber. Power surged through his arms, fire rushing into his veins. The blade moved with him, not against him. When he swung it clumsily toward the nearest guardian, light exploded from its edge. The stone giant shattered instantly, breaking into dust and rubble. The human gasped, staring at the glowing sword in disbelief. It was not heavy, it felt like an extension of his own body. The hum deepened into a steady rhythm, beating like a second heart within him. The other guardians roared and attacked, their blades crashing down like falling mountains. But the sword moved faster than thought. Each time he raised it, a shield of light formed, deflecting the crushing blows. Each time he struck, the edge cut through stone as if it were paper. He did not fight with skill. He fought with fear and desperation. Yet the sword guided him, correcting his wild swings, carrying him where he needed to be. One by one, the guardians fell, their shattered forms returning to lifeless stone. The ground trembled as the last giant collapsed, the chamber falling silent once more. The human stood in the center, chest heaving, arms shaking, the sword blazing in his hands. He felt alive in a way he had never known before. The blade whispered to him, not in words, but in feeling. It did not see him as unworthy. It had chosen him. But the awakening did not go unnoticed. Far beyond the ruins, across alien palaces and ancient temples, the sword's voice echoed. Mystics screamed as visions filled their eyes. Rulers trembled as omens struck their thrones. The silence was over, and the weapon that could change the fate of worlds was now in the hands of a human. Shock spread like wildfire. How could a fragile creature, born of a world no empire respected, be the one to succeed? It was an insult, a challenge, a threat. Even as he tried to steady his breath, the human felt the weight of eyes upon him. Though he could not see them, he knew he was no longer alone. Something stirred in the air. A figure formed from mist and light, drifting into the chamber. She was tall, armored in shadows and silver, her face hidden beneath a crown of broken flame. Her voice was soft but carried the weight of centuries. At last, the sword awakens. The human stepped back, the blade still glowing in his hand. Who are you?" he whispered. The figure lowered her head, eyes burning with sorrow and rage. I'm the one bound to the blade, she said, her voice like distant thunder. For 1,000 years I have waited, cursed to linger until the sword found its bearer. Her gaze fixed on him, sharp and unyielding. And now, it has chosen you, a human. The chamber grew colder, the silence heavy once again. The man did not know whether this was salvation or doom. He only knew one thing. The sword was no longer silent, and his life was no longer his own. The figure of light and shadow stood in the ruins, her form half real, half ghost. Her silver armor shimmered faintly, and her eyes glowed with an endless sorrow. The human gripped the sword tightly, unsure if she was friend or foe. His voice was unsteady. "Who are you?" The spirit stepped closer, her movements slow and deliberate. "I am Silura, last princess of the fallen kingdom," she said, her voice echoing like wine through broken halls. "I died with my people, yet my soul was bound to this blade." Her gaze fell upon the sword glowing in his hand. "For 1,000 years I have waited, and none were chosen, until you." The human's breath caught in his throat. He was no king, no champion, no warrior. Yet here stood a princess of legend, speaking as if fate had placed everything upon his shoulders. He shook his head. "You must be mistaken. I am no one." But the sword hummed in his hands, answering her in silence. Silura's expression hardened, a storm flashing in her ghostly eyes. "The sword does not mistake. Human," she said, her voice sharp as steel. "It does not choose the strongest, nor the proudest. It chooses the one it needs." Her words unsettled him, as if the blade itself had reached into his soul and weighed his heart. The chamber trembled again, as if the ruins themselves remembered her sorrow. Fragments of memory flickered in the air. Images of burning cities, falling towers, warriors screaming as shadows consumed them. The human staggered back, clutching his head, the visions tearing through his mind. He saw Silura on her throne, crowned in light, her sword raised high against an army of alien invaders. He saw betrayal, her guards turning on her, her kingdom collapsing. He saw her final stand, the blade glowing as she fell. And then, silence, a millennium of waiting. When the vision ended, his chest was heaving, sweat running down his face. Silura looked at him with both pity and fire. "Now you see," she whispered, "the sword carries not only power, but memory, curse, and destiny." The human clenched his jaw, staring at the weapon. It pulsed in his hand like a living heart, demanding an answer. He wanted to drop it, to walk away, but he knew already there was no turning back. From the shadows of the ruins, a faint sound echoed, distant footsteps, sharp and steady. Silura's head turned, her eyes narrowing. "They are coming," she said, her tone heavy with warning. "The warlords felt the awakening. They will not allow a human to wield what they could not." The man's blood ran cold. Already, he could imagine armored soldiers, alien war beasts, hunters sworn to capture or kill him. The world beyond the ruins had shifted the moment the sword sang. "Then I will leave," he said quickly, his grip tightening. "I never wanted this." But Silura stepped in front of him, her hand, though ghostly, lifting as if to block his path. "You think you can simply walk away?" she demanded, her voice fierce. "The sword has chosen, and now you are bound to it, as I am bound to you." Her eyes burned, sorrow and fury mingling. "If you abandon it, the empires will tear you apart." The human's heart sank. He had wandered from world to world, always nameless, always unseen. And now, for the first time, he was seen too clearly. Every empire, every ruler, every hunter, they would all know his name. The sword had made certain of it. Silura's voice softened, though her gaze did not. "I will guide you," she said, "but you must understand, the sword tests more than your strength, it tests your soul." Her form wavered, the light of her body flickering like a dying flame. "If you fail, it will destroy you, as it destroyed all who tried before." The man's throat tightened. He looked down at the blade, its glow reflecting in his weary eyes. The weapon was beautiful, terrible, alive, and though he wanted to deny it, deep within he felt a spark of something he could not name. Perhaps courage, perhaps madness. From outside the ruins, the sound of horns echoed, long and sharp. Shadows moved in the distance, soldiers marching, banners rising. The warlords had arrived. The human turned, fear burning in his chest. Celiora stood beside him, her ghostly hand resting on the blade, her eyes fierce. "Your trials have only begun," she said, her voice like a promise and a curse. "And the universe will not forgive the sword for choosing you." The ruins darkened, the light of the blade burning brighter. The silence of centuries was gone, replaced with the storm of destiny. And the human realized he was no longer running from life. Life was now running after him, with claws and fire. The Princess of Shadows walked at his side, bound to him, bound to the sword. And together they stepped forward into the storm that awaited. The sound of war drums echoed through the desert, carried by the wind like thunder. From the broken arches of the ruins, the human saw the horizon darken with banners. Armies were gathering, armored beasts pulling chariots, soldiers with alien war masks shining in the sun. The warlords had wasted no time. Word of the sword's awakening had already spread. Now they came not to worship, not to test, but to take. The human's grip tightened around the blade, its silver light glowing brighter with each heartbeat. Beside him, Sura's spirit form shimmered, her voice calm but edged with urgency. "They will not stop. They will come in waves until either you fall or they do." He swallowed hard, fear crawling in his chest. "I've never fought an army," he whispered. "You are not fighting with your hands," Celiora replied, her eyes sharp. "You are fighting with your soul. The sword will answer." The first wave arrived, armored riders charging through the sands, their beasts snarling, spears raised. The human stepped forward, the ground trembling beneath his boots. For a moment, doubt filled him. How could one man stand against this? But the sword pulsed, and when he raised it, light burst outward, forming a shield of silver energy. Spears shattered against it, the riders thrown back in shock. The human's fear twisted into something else, raw instinct, raw survival. With a cry, he swung the blade, and arcs of light cut across the battlefield. 3 riders fell instantly, their armor split apart like paper. The sword guided his arms, moving faster than thought. Every strike carried a storm. Every swing shattered the enemy's charge. But for each foe that fell, more came forward, their eyes filled with fury and disbelief. "A human," they shouted, their voices echoing in rage. "A human wields the blade." The battlefield shook as siege beasts approached, massive creatures with stone armor and burning eyes. On their backs rode alien warlords, their banners trailing fire. Celiora's form flared brighter, her voice carrying over the roar. "These are not men. They are monsters, forged for war. You must not falter." The human's chest heaved, sweat running down his face. "I don't know if I can do this," he whispered. "You can," she answered firmly, "because the sword chose you. It saw what you cannot yet see in yourself." The siege beast roared and charged, the ground splitting beneath its massive claws. The human stood his ground, raising the sword. When the beast's strike came, the blade flared with light, and the impact sent a shockwave across the ruins. Sand exploded into the air, pillars cracked and fell. But the human remained standing, the sword glowing like a sun in his hands. With one desperate swing, he cut across the beast's armored chest. The light carved through scale and bone, splitting the monster in two. Its dying roar echoed across the battlefield, silencing both friend and foe. The soldiers hesitated, fear spreading like wildfire. Never in 1,000 years had they seen the sword answer, and now it answered to a fragile human. But fear quickly turned into rage. The warlords screamed commands, their armies pressing harder. Arrows darkened the sky, fire rained from catapults. The ruins shook under the storm of war. The human staggered back, the blade still blazing. He was tired already, his arms heavy, his breath ragged. Yet the sword did not slow. It carried him forward. Every strike was fire, every step was thunder. Celiura moved with him, her ghostly form fighting at his side, her eyes burning with memories of her lost kingdom. Together they cut a path through the battlefield, human and spirit, blade and shadow. And for the first time, the armies of the warlords began to break. But victory was not yet his. From the center of the battlefield, a warlord stepped forward, taller than the rest, armored in black steel that glowed with crimson fire. He carried a weapon forged to mimic the ancient blade, a mockery of the true sword. His voice boomed across the sands. "You dare," he roared, pointing his weapon at the human. "You dare steal what belongs to us." The human felt the weight of his words like a mountain pressing on his chest. This was no ordinary foe. This was a warlord who had tried and failed to lift the true sword. And now his fury was endless. Celiura's voice dropped to a whisper, trembling with both warning and memory. "That is Lord Caliph, the butcher of my kingdom, the one who betrayed us, the one who left me bound to this blade." Her eyes burned with a rage so fierce it shook her ghostly form. "You must face him, or everything ends here." The human swallowed, his throat dry, his body trembling. He had survived the guardians, survived the beast, survived the army. But now he stood against a warlord whose power had broken empires. And still, the sword pulsed in his hand, warm, alive, whispering one truth. He was chosen, and chosen men do not run. With a roar that came from fear, courage, and desperation all at once, the human raised the blade. The battlefield fell silent for a breath. And then, the first duel began, the true battle for the sword's destiny. The clash between the human and Lord Caliph echoed across the ruins. Every strike shook the ground. Every blow sent sparks of fire and light into the sky. Caliph's weapon, though forged as a copy, carried terrible power. But the true sword, glowing in the human's hands, refused to yield. For what felt like hours they fought, blades crashing, dust rising, shouts and roars blending into chaos. The human's body trembled with exhaustion, but the sword seemed to carry him forward. It guided his arms, pushed his steps, and filled his lungs with breath when he thought he had none left. At last, with one desperate strike, the human's blade cut through Caliph's armor. The warlord fell back, roaring with fury, before his soldiers dragged him from the battlefield. The armies retreated into the desert, their banners vanishing into the horizon. The first battle was won, but it was only the beginning. The human collapsed to his knees, gasping for air, sweat and dust covering his skin. The sword dimmed slightly, its glow fading into a steady rhythm like a heartbeat. Celiura's ghostly figure stood beside him, her face unreadable, her eyes watching him with a strange mix of sorrow and pride. "You survived," she said quietly. "Few could have stood against Caliph and lived." The human looked up, his voice hoarse. "I did not survive because of me. I survived because of this sword." Celiura's gaze hardened, the glow of her eyes deepening. "And that is what you must learn to fear." He frowned, his tired hands gripping the blade tightly. "What do you mean?" he asked. "The sword is not a gift," Celiura whispered, her voice echoing with centuries of pain. "It is a trial, a curse woven into steel, a test for every soul that dares wield it." She raised her hand, her ghostly fingers brushing the glowing symbols on the blade. "Do you know why so many kings failed, why warlords died trying to claim it?" The human shook his head, his chest tightening. Celiura's face grew grim, shadows flickering across her form. "The sword does not ask for strength. It does not ask for skill," she said slowly. "It asks for sacrifice." Her words hung in the air like a cold wind. "The more you wield it, the more it binds itself to your soul, and the more it demands of you." The human's breath caught in his throat. Sacrifice. He had already given blood, sweat, and fear. But Celiura's eyes told him this was only the surface. He whispered, "What will it take?" Her gaze softened, filled with a sadness that seemed endless. "It will take everything," she said, her voice trembling. "Your peace, your freedom, your future." Her hand dropped to her side, her ghostly body flickering faintly. "And if you're not careful, it may even take the people you love." The human's heart sank, his eyes falling to the blade. It glowed softly in his hands, silent and calm, as if mocking his fear. He wanted to throw it away, to leave it behind in the ruins. But when he loosened his grip, the sword pulsed sharply, refusing to be abandoned. Celiura shook her head, her voice firm. "You cannot let it go now. The choice was made when you touched it." The silence stretched between them, broken only by the whisper of desert winds. Finally, Celiura lowered her gaze, her voice softening again. "I was the last to wield it before you," she confessed. "And it destroyed me, it consumed my kingdom, it bound my soul, even in death." The human looked at her, shocked, his voice low. "Then why would you help me?" Her eyes glimmered with pain, but also with fire. "Because if you fall, the sword will choose another, and another, until worlds are drowned in its curse." Her voice rose with fierce determination. "I will see it end with you, one way or another." The human stood slowly, his body aching, his mind heavy with fear and doubt. He gazed out toward the desert horizon, where Calith's army had vanished. He knew they would return, stronger and angrier. And he knew other warlords, other empires, would soon march as well. The awakening of the blade had already changed the universe, and he was now at the center of it. Celiura drifted beside him, her voice sharp again. "You must understand, the sword does not only test you in battle, it tests your heart, your loyalty, your choices." Her form shimmered, fading slightly, as if even speaking the truth weakened her. "Every step you take will carry weight. Every ally you trust may be tested. Every sacrifice will shape you." The human's chest tightened, his hands gripping the hilt until his knuckles whitened. He whispered to himself, more than to her, "Then I will endure it." Celiura's ghostly eyes widened slightly, as if surprised by his resolve. But then she gave a faint, almost sorrowful smile. "Perhaps that is why the sword chose you," she murmured. "Not for what you are, but for what you are willing to become." Above them, the sky darkened as storm clouds gathered over the desert. The air grew heavy, as if the world itself listened to their words. The human raised the sword, its light flickering like a star against the storm. The silence was gone, the secrets were revealed, and the path ahead was darker than ever. The days after the battle were heavy with silence. The human and Celiura moved across the desert, leaving the ruined temple behind. The sword's glow dimmed, resting, yet always alive in his grip. Every step carried weight, every horizon whispered danger. For the armies of Calith were not the only threat. Other warlords had felt the awakening too, and their spies moved like shadows through every land. The human knew he could not survive alone. In a distant settlement of traders, he found allies, a small band of wanderers and mercenaries, each driven by greed, loyalty, or desperation. They had seen him wield the sword, and though they did not understand it, they followed. Among them was a tall alien named Drell, with scarred skin and sharp eyes. Drell spoke little, but his strength and silence made him seem dependable. The human trusted him most. Celiura's spirit watched carefully, her eyes narrowed. She never trusted easily, and she warned the human more than once. "The sword tests loyalty," she whispered. "Not all who stand beside you will remain." But the human, weary and in need of friends, ignored her caution, for he wanted to believe that not all souls were filled with betrayal. Together, they traveled through canyons and storm-swept plains. Enemies attacked them at night, bandits hungry for the glow of the sword. The human fought, Celiura guided, and his allies defended him with skill. The group became stronger, bound by survival. Yet beneath the surface, whispers grew. Drell watched the sword too closely, his silence hiding thoughts darker than trust. One night, under the burning light of twin moons, the betrayal came. The human awoke to the cold edge of a blade at his throat. Drell stood above him, eyes hard, voice sharp. "You are not worthy," he hissed. "You are only a man of flesh and fear. The sword belongs to one stronger." The other mercenaries stood back, torn between loyalty and greed. Some lowered their heads, ashamed. Others stared at the sword with hunger. Celiura appeared instantly, her ghostly form blazing with fury. "Do not touch it," she warned, her voice shaking the ground. But Drell only sneered, his hand reaching for the hilt. The human's heart pounded, rage and sorrow mixing in his chest. He had trusted this man, trusted his strength, his silence, his loyalty, and now, in a single night, all of it shattered. When Drell's hand touched the sword, the blade screamed. A violent surge of light threw him backward, his skin burning, his voice twisting into agony. The sword rejected him as it had rejected all others. But the damage was done, the camp in chaos, trust broken. The human rose slowly, his hands trembling, his voice heavy. "You were my ally," he said, staring at Drell, writhing in pain. "And you chose betrayal." Drell spat blood, his voice still filled with defiance. "You are weak, human. You will fail. The sword will consume you as it did her." His eyes flicked towards Celiura, his words cutting like poison. "She knows it. That is why she binds herself to you, waiting for your fall." For a moment, the human faltered, doubt piercing his heart. Was Drell right? Was the sword already consuming him? But Celiura stepped forward, her ghostly form shining brighter than before. Her voice cut through the night like steel. "He lies, but his words carried danger. The sword will test you again and again, and if you falter, it will claim you." Her eyes locked onto his, fierce and unyielding. "Do not let betrayal break you." The human clenched his jaw, his hands gripping the hilt until the blade hummed in his veins. He turned to the others, his voice steady despite the storm in his chest. "If you stay with me," he said firmly. "But if you doubt, if you hunger for this blade, leave now, for I will not fall twice to betrayal." Silence followed, heavy and sharp. A few turned and walked away, vanishing into the desert without a word. But the rest bowed their heads, choosing loyalty over greed. As the camp settled again, the human sat by the fire, staring at the sword's glow. He felt the weight of destiny pressing harder, heavier. This was no longer just about survival, no longer just about enemies and battles. It was about his soul, tested with every step, with every choice. Celiura sat beside him, her ghostly hand resting near his, her voice soft. "You must remember this night," she whispered, "for betrayal will come again, and each time it will cut deeper." The human nodded, his eyes burning with resolve. "Then I will not break," he said quietly. "Not for greed, not for betrayal, not for anyone." The sword pulsed in answer, its glow brighter than before, as if it too recognized his resolve. And though the night was long, filled with shadows and silence, the human sat unshaken, for betrayal had nearly undone him, but resolve had rebuilt him stronger. The path ahead would demand more, far more, and he was ready to face it. The desert winds howled as the final dawn rose. The human stood at the edge of a broken cliff, the sword in his hands glowing brighter than ever before. Behind him, the last of his allies gathered, weary, scarred, but still standing. Beside him, Celiura's spirit shimmered, her eyes filled with both sorrow and fire. They all knew what was coming. The warlords had united, their armies stretching across the horizon like a sea of steel and fire. And at the heart of it stood Caliph, his black armor burning crimson, his voice booming across the sands. "This ends today," Caliph roared. "The sword belongs to the strong, and you, human, will be crushed beneath us." The army shouted, their war horns shaking the sky. But the human did not falter. He raised the sword, its light cutting through the storm of sound. His voice, though hoarse, carried clear. You have tried for 1,000 years and failed, and now the sword has chosen. He looked at Caliph, his eyes steady. And it did not choose you. The armies charged, the ground trembling as beasts and soldiers stormed forward. The human stepped down from the cliff, the sword blazing like a star. Syrah's spirit walked beside him, her voice whispering in his ear. This is the final trial. The blade will demand more than strength now. It will demand your very soul. The human nodded, fear and courage burning together in his chest. I will give what it asks, he whispered. The battle erupted, fire and steel colliding. The sword cut through soldiers like lightning, every strike a storm, every swing a roar of thunder. Arrows shattered against his shield of light. Catapults crumbled under his blade. The armies pressed harder, wave after wave, but the human did not fall. The sword carried him, its heartbeat pounding within his chest. Syrah's voice echoed, guiding his steps, warning of strikes, urging him forward. Together, they moved as one, man and spirit, blade and shadow. At last, Caliph himself advanced, his black blade burning, his fury endless. The two clashed, the battlefield trembling beneath their strikes. Every blow from Caliph was like a mountain crashing down, every counter from the human like a storm tearing the sky. They fought across the sands, through broken pillars, through fire and blood. The armies stopped, watching, for they knew this duel would decide everything. Caliph's voice roared with hatred. You are nothing human, nothing but flesh. You cannot carry what I could not. But the human's voice answered with iron. That is why the sword chose me. Not because I am strong, but because I endure. With one final swing, the sword's light burst outward, shattering Caliph's black blade. The warlord fell to his knees, defeated, his roar echoing in his silence. But the victory was not without cost. The sword burned hotter, brighter, its glow consuming the human's arms, his chest, his very breath. Ciliora's eyes widened, her voice filled with fear. It is taking you, the sacrifice. It has begun. The human gritted his teeth, his body trembling as fire rushed through him. He looked at her, his voice soft but steady. If this is the price, then I accept it. The sword's light engulfed him, his body fading into the blaze. But Celiora reached forward, her ghostly hands clutching his, her voice breaking. No, not alone, she whispered, tears of light falling from her eyes. The curse has bound me for 1,000 years. Let end with us both. The human's eyes widened, but before he could speak, she stepped into the light with him, her spirit and his soul merging into the blade's fire. The battlefield froze as a column of light rose into the heavens, brighter than any sun. The armies fell silent, their weapons dropping, their eyes blinded by the brilliance. When the light faded, Caliph and his legions were gone, scattered like dust on the wind. And where the human had stood, only the sword remained. It lay in the sand, silent once more. But its glow was different now, gentler, quieter, as if at last it was at peace. Legends spread across the stars, whispered in palaces and taverns alike. They spoke of the nameless human who lifted the sword when no king could, of the spirit princess who walked beside him, and of the battle that shook empires. They said the sword demanded sacrifice, and the human gave it freely. And with his gift, the curse was broken. For 1,000 years the sword had chosen no one, until a human dared to lift it, and though his body was gone, his story remained. A legend not of power, but of resolve, sacrifice, and courage. The universe remembered.